The gunshot that killed Preston Tucker echoed through the Nevada mining town of Superior on a blazing afternoon in July 1882. And his widow Penelope found herself holding his lifeless body in the middle of Main Street, while their 3 young children screamed from the general store doorway. She had loved him with every fiber of her being, this gentle farmer who had tried his hand at mining to give his family a better life. And now he was gone because of a claim dispute that should never have escalated beyond harsh words. The sheriff ruled it self-defense when the other miner said Preston drew first, though Penelope knew her husband had never carried a gun in his life. Justice in Superior was whatever the men with the most money said it was, and a poor farmer's widow had no voice at all. The funeral was simple because they had no money for anything elaborate. Penelope stood beside the grave with 7-year-old Margaret clinging to her skirts, 5-year-old Thomas trying to be brave, and baby Samuel wailing in her arms. The summer sun beat down mercilessly as the preacher said words that barely registered in her grief-stricken mind. When the last shovel of dirt covered Preston's pine coffin, she walked her children back to the tiny house on the edge of town and tried to figure out how they would survive. The arithmetic was brutal and unforgiving. Preston had left them nothing but debts. The mine claim had produced exactly $3 worth of silver ore before his death, and the company store had extended them credit for supplies that now came due. The house was rented, the furniture borrowed, and the larder nearly bare. Penelope had exactly $12 to her name, 3 children to feed, and no husband in a time and place where a woman's worth was measured by the man beside her. She spent that first night after the funeral sitting at the kitchen table with a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper, calculating and recalculating until the numbers blurred. Food would cost roughly $4 a week for the 4 of them if they ate sparingly. Rent was $6 a month. They needed clothes as the children grew, medicine when they fell ill, fuel for heat when winter came. She would need to earn at least $10 a week, probably more, to keep them in their home with food in their bellies. The problem was that there were precious few jobs for women in Superior, and the ones that existed paid almost nothing. The next morning, Penelope put on her one good dress, the black one she had worn to the funeral, and walked up and down Main Street asking for work. The mercantile owner looked her up and down and offered her a job cleaning the store before dawn each day for 50 cents a week. The hotel manager said she could do laundry for 25 cents per load, as many loads as she could manage. The saloon keeper started to make an offer that turned her stomach, and she walked out before he could finish his sentence. By noon, she had cobbled together 3 jobs that might, if she worked herself to the bone and never slept, bring in enough money to survive. She would clean the mercantile every morning before dawn for 50 cents a week. She would take in laundry and mending, which she could do at home while watching the children, for whatever she could earn piece by piece. And she would serve breakfast and lunch at the boarding house 6 days a week for $3 plus table scraps to take home to her children. That first week nearly killed her. Penelope would wake at 4 in the morning when the darkness was still complete, and the desert air carried a chill that seemed to seep into her bones. She would slip out of the house quietly so as not to wake the children, trusting that Margaret was old enough to watch her brothers for the hour it took to sweep and scrub the mercantile. Her hands grew raw from the lye soap and rough brooms. Her back ached from bending and reaching, but she finished each morning just as the sun crept over the eastern mountains. Then she would rush home to wake the children, dress them, and make them whatever meager breakfast they had. Usually it was cornmeal mush or bread if she could afford flour. Sometimes it was just water with a little sugar stirred in to quiet their hungry bellies. By 7, she had to be at the boarding house, wearing a clean apron and a smile she did not feel, serving eggs and bacon and biscuits to miners and cowboys while her own children made do with scraps. The boarding house work lasted until 2 in the afternoon, by which time her feet throbbed and her head pounded from the heat of the kitchen. She would take the table scraps carefully wrapped in newspaper, accept her 50 cents for the day's work, and walk home to find Margaret struggling to keep the boys occupied and out of trouble. Then, the laundry work began. Other women in town, the ones whose husbands still lived and brought home wages, would drop off their dirty clothes and linens. Penelope would heat water over the fire, scrub each item on the washboard until her knuckles bled, wring them out, hang them to dry, iron them smooth, and fold them neatly. Each load paid 25 cents and took roughly 2 hours of hard labor. If she was lucky, she could finish 3 loads before she had to make supper for her children and put them to bed. Then she would do mending by candlelight until her eyes could no longer focus, earning 5 cents to hem a dress or 10 cents to take in a coat. She would fall into bed near midnight, every muscle screaming, and sleep for 4 hours before starting again. Sunday was supposed to be a day of rest, but Penelope spent it catching up on the laundry and mending she could not finish during the week, baking bread if she could afford flour, and trying to give her children at least a few hours of the attention they desperately needed. 6 weeks passed in this grinding routine. Penelope grew thinner, her dresses hanging loose on a frame that had always been slender and was now nearly gaunt. Dark circles carved shadows beneath her eyes, and her hands were a ruin of cuts and calluses. But her children had food in their bellies and a roof over their heads, and that was all that mattered. She had loved Preston with all her heart, mourned him with every breath, but she could not afford the luxury of falling apart. Her children needed her to be strong. It was late August when Harrison Thorne rode into Superior with a string of horses to sell, and a reputation that preceded him by 100 miles. People said he was the best horsebreaker in Nevada, maybe in the whole territory. They said he had a gift for understanding animals that most men could never match, that he could gentle the wildest mustang without breaking its spirit. They also said he was fair in his dealings, honest to a fault, and had never been known to back down from a fight or start one that was not justified. Penelope first saw him on a Wednesday morning as she was hurrying from the mercantile to the boarding house. He was standing in the street outside the livery stable, a tall man in his late 20s with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of cedar bark. He wore typical cowboy gear, nothing fancy, but everything about him was well maintained and of good quality. His hat was weathered but not shabby, his boots worn but freshly oiled, his gun belt buckled with quiet confidence. What caught her attention, though, was not his appearance but the way he spoke to his horses. She paused for just a moment, knowing she was already running late, and watched as he led a beautiful chestnut mare from the trailer. The mare was nervous, dancing sideways and tossing her head, but Harrison simply laid a hand on her neck and said something too quiet for Penelope to hear. The mare settled immediately, ears forward, and followed him into the stable as docile as a lamb. There was something compelling about a man who could command such trust from an animal, but Penelope had no time to dwell on it. She was late, and the boarding house owner, Mrs. Chen, did not tolerate tardiness. She hurried on, promptly forgot about the cowboy and his horses, and spent the next 7 hours serving food and cleaning tables. That Sunday, Penelope took her children to church, as she did every week despite her exhaustion. It was important to her that they maintain some normalcy, some connection to the community and the faith that had sustained her through Preston's death. Margaret wore a dress that Penelope had stayed up until 2 in the morning to let down because the girl was growing so fast. Thomas had on clothes that were patched but clean, and baby Samuel looked almost presentable in a gown that had belonged to his sister years before. They sat in the back pew as they always did, and Penelope tried to focus on the sermon rather than the mental tally of work waiting for her at home. 3 loads of laundry, 2 dresses to hem. Thomas needed new shoes, but she could not afford them yet. The rent would be due in 4 days, and she was still $1 short. The worries spun through her mind in an endless loop, broken only when Margaret tugged on her sleeve and whispered that Samuel needed to go outside. Penelope took the baby out into the churchyard and was changing his diaper on a bench beneath a cottonwood tree when she heard a familiar voice say, "Excuse me, madam. I do not mean to intrude, but you look like you could use a hand." She looked up to find Harrison Thorne standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand, expression genuinely concerned. Up close, she could see that his eyes were not just brown but had flecks of gold and green, and his face, though weathered by sun and wind, had a kindness to it that made something in her chest tighten with an emotion she had no time to examine. "Thank you, but I am managing fine," she said, pinning Samuel's fresh diaper with practiced efficiency and settling him on her hip. The baby immediately grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked, making her wince. "I am sure you are," Harrison said, and something in his tone made it clear he actually meant the words rather than offering empty politeness. "I have noticed you around town this past week. You work mornings at the mercantile, days at the boarding house, and it looks like you take in laundry besides." Penelope felt a flush of something between embarrassment and defiance heat her cheeks. "A widow does what she must to feed her children, Mr. Thorne." His eyebrows rose slightly at her use of his name, but he did not comment on it. "You know who I am, then." "Superior is not so large that strangers go unremarked," she said, adjusting Samuel on her hip when he started to squirm. "You are the horse breaker, here to sell stock to the mines for hauling ore." "That is part of it," he acknowledged. "I am also looking to settle somewhere permanent. I have been drifting for near 10 years now, and I figure it is time to put down roots. Superior seems as good a place as any." "Superior is a hard town with little mercy for those without means," Penelope said bluntly. She did not know why she was telling him this, warning him off. Perhaps because he seemed like a decent man, and decent men often fared poorly in places like this. Harrison studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was seeing far more than she wanted to reveal. "Hard towns need good people all the more," he said finally. "And it seems to me you are one of the good ones, Mrs. Tucker." The use of her name startled her. "How did you know?" asked around, he said simply. "Heard you lost your husband a couple months back in a mining dispute. Heard you are working yourself to the bone to keep your family together. Heard you are too proud to accept charity and too stubborn to give up." "Gossip travels fast," Penelope said stiffly. "Truth travels," Harrison corrected. "And there is no shame in what you are doing. In fact, I admire the hell out of it, if you will pardon my language." Before she could formulate a response, Margaret appeared in the church doorway, looking worried. "Mama, Thomas spilled water on his shirt." "I will be right there," Penelope called back, then turned to Harrison. "I must go. Good day, Mr. Thorne." "Good day, Mrs. Tucker," he said, settling his hat back on his head. "I hope I will see you around town." She hurried back into the church, telling herself that the strange flutter in her stomach was just exhaustion and hunger, nothing more. She could not afford to feel anything for any man, let alone a drifting cowboy who would probably be gone in a week. Her children were her only priority, and she had no room in her life for complications. But that night, as she scrubbed laundry in the dim light of a single candle, she found herself thinking about the way Harrison Thorne had looked at her. Not with pity, which she had grown to hate, and not with the ugly speculation that some men in town regarded her with. He had looked at her with respect, as though he saw her not as a desperate widow or a potential conquest, but simply as a person worthy of regard. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The next week brought a string of unbearably hot days that made the laundry work even more miserable than usual. Penelope would stand over the steaming wash pot in her tiny yard, sweat running down her face and back, scrubbing at stubborn stains until her arms trembled with fatigue. Margaret helped as much as a 7-year-old could, hanging the smaller items on the line while Penelope wrestled with sheets and heavy canvas work pants. Thomas was supposed to watch Samuel, but more often than not the baby would escape and toddle into the yard, getting into everything he should not touch. It was on one such afternoon, when Penelope was at her absolute limit of exhaustion and frustration, that Samuel managed to pull a basket of clean laundry off the porch and directly into the dirt. Penelope watched in horror as 2 hours of backbreaking work was ruined in an instant. The laundry belonged to the mine supervisor's wife, a woman who had already complained once about wrinkles in her petticoats. If Penelope had to rewash everything, she would not finish the other 2 loads waiting and would lose those customers. She stood frozen, staring at the disaster, feeling tears of pure exhaustion well in her eyes. She never cried, could not afford to cry, but in that moment the weight of everything threatened to crush her completely. "Whoa there, little fellow," a male voice said, and Penelope looked up to see Harrison Thorne scooping Samuel out of the dirt with easy competence. "You are making more work for your mama, and it looks to me like she has plenty already." "Mr. Thorne," Penelope said, rapidly blinking back tears and trying to compose herself. "I did not hear you approach. Did not mean to startle you," he said, settling Samuel on his hip as naturally as if he had been handling babies all his life. The boy, who usually screamed when strangers held him, simply stared at Harrison with wide, curious eyes. "I was passing by and saw the situation. This laundry for the supervisor's wife." "Yes," Penelope admitted, seeing no point in lying. "She wanted it by tomorrow, and now I will have to wash it all again." "So we wash it again," Harrison said simply. Penelope blinked. "I've got 2 good hands and a strong back, and you look like you could use the help," he said. "Put me to work, Mrs. Tucker." "I cannot ask you to do that," she protested. "You have your own work." "Already sold all my horses," he said, "and I am staying at the boarding house until I can find a place of my own, so my time is my own. Besides, I am offering, you are not asking. There is a difference." Penelope wanted to refuse. Pride demanded that she refuse. But Samuel had started playing with Harrison's collar. Thomas was crying because he felt guilty about not watching his brother properly. Margaret looked exhausted from trying to help, and Penelope herself was swaying on her feet from fatigue. She needed help desperately, even if accepting it felt like admitting defeat. "All right," she said quietly. "Thank you." Harrison's face broke into a smile that transformed his whole appearance, making him look younger and lighter. "Just point me at the wash pot and tell me what to do." For the next 3 hours, Harrison Thorne worked alongside Penelope in her dusty yard, scrubbing laundry without complaint. He had clearly done manual labor before because he did not need much instruction, and he was not afraid to get his hands dirty. He told stories that made Margaret giggle and Thomas forget his tears. He bounced Samuel on his knee during breaks, keeping the baby entertained so he would not create more chaos. and he treated Penelope with an easy respect that made her feel less like a charity case and more like a partner in a shared task. By the time the sun set, and the laundry hung clean on the line once more, Penelope felt something she had not experienced in months. Not happiness exactly, but a lightening of the constant crushing burden. For a few hours, she had not been alone in her struggle, and the relief was almost painful in its intensity. "I cannot pay you," she said as Harrison prepared to leave, hating that she had to say it but knowing she must. "Did not ask for pay," he said, dusting off his pants. "But I would not say no to a cup of water before I head back to town." She fetched him water from the well, cool and fresh, and watched as he drank it down. The evening light cast long shadows across the yard, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. Margaret and Thomas were inside putting Samuel to bed, giving them a moment of relative privacy. "Why did you help me?" Penelope asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Harrison handed back the empty cup and considered his answer. "Because you needed help, and I was able to give it. Does there need to be more reason than that?" "In my experience, yes," she said honestly. "People do not do things for nothing." "Then your experience has been with the wrong kind of people," Harrison said, his voice gentle but firm. "I am not looking for anything from you, Mrs. Tucker, except maybe the chance to help again if the opportunity arises. You are working 3 jobs to keep your family together, and that is admirable as hell, but you do not have to do it alone." "I am alone," Penelope said, the words coming out harsher than she intended. "My husband is dead, I have no family, and I am responsible for 3 children. Alone is the reality of my situation." "Alone and lonely are not the same thing," Harrison said, "and neither one has to be permanent." He tipped his hat to her and walked away before she could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the darkening yard with his words echoing in her mind. That night, as she did mending by candlelight, her fingers moving automatically through stitches she could have done blind, she let herself think about what it might be like to not be alone. To have someone to share the burden, to talk to at the end of the day, to simply sit with in comfortable silence. She had loved Preston, loved him still in the way one loves a memory, but their marriage had been formed young when they barely knew themselves. They had grown together, built a life together, but there had always been a certain simplicity to their relationship. He was her husband, she was his wife, and they fulfilled the roles that society had assigned them. It had been good and comfortable and safe, but looking back now with the perspective of loss and hardship, she wondered if it had been the great love that songs and stories promised. Not that it mattered. She was not looking for love or even companionship. She was simply trying to survive, and entertaining romantic notions about a cowboy who had been kind to her once was foolishness she could not afford. But Harrison Thorne did not seem inclined to let himself be forgotten. Over the next 2 weeks, he appeared at her house 3 more times, always with some plausible excuse. Once he brought a sack of apples. He claimed he had won in a card game and could not possibly eat himself. Once he showed up just as she was struggling to move a heavy trunk of wet laundry and offered his strong back. Once he arrived with a wooden toy horse he had carved, saying he had made it for practice and wondered if Thomas might like it. Each time Penelope accepted his help with reluctance that gradually softened into something like gratitude. Each time he stayed a little longer, talked a little more freely, and revealed pieces of himself that made him seem less like a stranger and more like someone she was coming to know. She learned that he had grown up in Colorado, the youngest of 5 brothers on a cattle ranch that could barely support one family, let alone the next generation. He had left home at 18 with his father's blessing and $20 in his pocket, determined to make his own way. He had worked as a ranch hand, a trail driver, a deputy sheriff briefly until he realized he had no stomach for the politics of law enforcement, and finally as a horsebreaker, which suited his temperament and skills perfectly. He had never married, though he admitted there had been a girl in Colorado he had courted for a while. She had wanted him to settle down and work her father's farm, and he had wanted to see more of the world than the same 100 acres for the rest of his life. They had parted ways amicably, and last he heard she had married the farmer from the next property over and had 4 children. "You regret it?" Penelope asked one evening as they sat on her porch steps watching the children play in the yard. It was late September now, and the brutal heat of summer was beginning to give way to cooler evenings. "Not marrying her?" Harrison considered the question seriously. "No, I do not think so. She deserved someone who wanted the same life she did, and I would have made her miserable within a year. But I do regret not having a family of my own, not building something lasting. A man gets tired of drifting after a while." "So you want to settle in Superior," Penelope said. "I want to settle somewhere," he corrected. "Superior has possibilities. Good grazing land in the valleys, water if you know where to look, and growing demand for quality horses as the mines expand. I have been saving my money for years, and I have enough now to buy land and start breeding stock properly instead of just breaking wild mustangs." "That sounds like a good plan," Penelope said, trying to ignore the small pang of disappointment at the thought of him having a whole life plan that had nothing to do with her. Harrison was quiet for a moment, then said, "It would be a better plan with a partner." Penelope's heart gave a strange skip, but she forced herself to respond lightly. "I am sure there are plenty of men looking to go into horse breeding with someone of your experience." "I was not talking about a business partner," Harrison said, turning to look at her directly. "Penelope, I am going to be blunt because I am not good at pretty words and I do not see the point in dancing around the truth. I have been in town for 5 weeks now, and I have spent a good portion of that time finding excuses to be near you. I admire your strength, your dedication to your children, and the way you face hardship without complaint. I enjoy your company, value your conversation, and if I am reading the situation completely wrong then I apologize. But I would like permission to court you properly." Penelope stared at him, genuinely shocked. She had known he was friendly, had suspected he might be attracted to her, but she had not expected such a direct proposal. "Mr. Thorne, I barely know you." "Harrison," he said, "and that is the point of courting, is it not? To get to know each other better and see if we suit. I am a widow with 3 children and debts I am still paying off," Penelope said, ticking off points on her fingers. "I work 3 jobs that leave me exhausted, and I have no dowry to bring to a marriage. I do not have time for courting or the energy for romance. I do not understand why you would be interested in taking on such a burden." Harrison's expression softened. "You are not a burden, Penelope, and your children are not a burden either. They are bright, good kids who have been through hell and come out strong because their mother is strong. As for your jobs and your debts, that is actually part of what I want to talk to you about." "What do you mean?" He took a breath, seeming to gather his thoughts. "You are working yourself to death doing 3 jobs that barely pay enough to survive. You are exhausted all the time, your children barely see you, and there is no end in sight because you can never get ahead, just stay even. What if there was another way?" "There is no other way," Penelope said flatly. "I have looked at this from every angle, calculated every possibility. 3 jobs is what it takes." "What if you only needed one?" Harrison said quietly. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "1 job would not pay enough to support my family." "I have tried." "I am not talking about a job," Harrison said. "I am talking about marriage. Marry me, Penelope. Be my wife. Let me take care of you and your children while we build a life together." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Penelope gripped the edge of the porch step to steady herself, certain she had misheard. "You cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious about anything in my life," Harrison said. "I know it seems sudden, and I know you barely know me, which is why I am asking to court you first, not demanding an answer right this minute. But I want you to understand my intentions. I am not looking for a brief romance or a casual dalliance. I am looking to build a real life with a real family, and I believe we could do that together." "Why?" The question burst out of her, raw and confused. "Why me? You could find someone younger, prettier, without children or debts or complications." "I do not want someone younger or prettier or uncomplicated," Harrison said with a conviction that made her breath catch. "I want someone strong enough to face the hardest circumstances and not break. I want someone who loves her children enough to sacrifice everything for them. I want someone real, Penelope, not some fantasy. And when I look at you, that is what I see. Someone real and strong and worthy of respect." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You are describing someone who does not exist. I am not strong, Harrison. I am terrified all the time. Terrified I will not make enough money, terrified my children will go hungry, terrified I will fail them. I am exhausted and overwhelmed and barely holding on. That is not strength." "Yes, it is," Harrison said firmly. "Being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. That is the definition of courage. You are stronger than you know, Penelope Tucker, and I would be honored if you would give me a chance to prove I am worthy of you." She wanted to say yes. The word hovered on her tongue, seductive and dangerous. How easy it would be to let him shoulder her burdens, to accept his protection and support, to stop fighting every battle alone. But 17 years of hard living had taught her that easy solutions usually came with hidden costs. "I need time to think," she said finally. "This is too important a decision to make lightly. I have to consider what is best for my children, not just what I might want." "That is fair," Harrison said, though she could see the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." He stood up, dusted off his pants, and prepared to leave. But at the foot of the porch steps he turned back. "One more thing, Penelope. You keep talking about what is best for your children, but you are allowed to consider what is best for you too. You matter, not just as a mother but as a person in your own right. Do not forget that." Then he was gone, walking back toward town in the gathering darkness, leaving Penelope alone with thoughts that tumbled through her mind like leaves in a windstorm. That night she could not sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to her children's breathing from the next room, and tried to think logically about Harrison's proposal. The practical advantages were obvious. If she married him, she would immediately be freed from the crushing burden of 3 jobs. Her children would have a father figure, a man who already seemed genuinely fond of them. Harrison had money saved and a solid plan for building a horse breeding business that could support a family comfortably. But marriage was not just a practical arrangement, or at least it should not be. She had cared for Preston, genuinely cared for him, and building a life with someone she did not love felt wrong. The question was whether she could come to love Harrison Thorne, and whether that was even the right question to be asking. She barely knew him, had spent perhaps 20 hours total in his company. But in those hours, she had seen kindness, integrity, and a straightforward honesty that was increasingly rare. He worked hard without complaint, treated her children with genuine affection rather than mere tolerance, and looked at her like she was someone worth looking at. Was that enough foundation to build a marriage? More importantly, could she afford not to try? Every week, she worked herself closer to complete collapse. Every week, she watched her children make do with less than they needed. Every week, she fell a little further behind despite her best efforts. Harrison was offering her a lifeline, and refusing it out of some abstract notion of proper courtship length seemed almost criminally foolish. But what if she said yes and he changed? What if marriage revealed cruelty or selfishness that courtship had hidden? What if he grew to resent her children or proved to be irresponsible with money? She would be trapped with no way out, her children's fates tied to a man she barely knew. Round and round her thoughts went until the first light of dawn crept through the window, and she had to rise for another day of backbreaking work. She went through the motions mechanically, cleaning the mercantile, serving at the boarding house, scrubbing laundry until her hands were raw. Harrison did not appear that day or the next, giving her the space she had asked for, and she found herself missing his presence more than she had expected. On the third day, Mrs. Chen at the boarding house pulled her aside after the lunch service. "That cowboy has been asking about you," she said without preamble. Mrs. Chen was a Chinese immigrant who had come to Nevada during the railroad boom and stayed when her husband died in a construction accident. She ran the boarding house with ruthless efficiency and a shrewd eye for human nature. "Has he?" Penelope said, trying to sound neutral. "Do not play coy with me," Mrs. Chen said. "I am too old for games. He wants to marry you. He told you that. Did not have to tell me. I have eyes. Question is, what are you going to say?" Penelope sighed. "I do not know. It seems too fast." Mrs. Chen snorted. "Fast? You think you have time to waste? You are working yourself to death, girl. I see it every day. You show up here with circles under your eyes, hands shaking from exhaustion, and you still smile and serve like everything is fine. But it is not fine, and we both know it." "I am managing," Penelope said stiffly. "You are surviving, barely," Mrs. Chen corrected. "There is a difference. That cowboy is offering you a chance at something better. You would be a fool not to take it. You think I should marry someone I barely know. I think you should marry a good man who treats you with respect and can provide for your children," Mrs. Chen said bluntly. "Love is nice when you can afford it, but security is better. I loved my husband with all my heart, and when he died, I had nothing. No money, no family, no way to survive except this." She gestured around the boarding house kitchen. "I built this from nothing because I had to. But if a good man had offered me a partnership, a way to build something together instead of alone, I would have taken it and been grateful." "But what if it does not work?" Penelope asked quietly. "What if I make the wrong choice and my children suffer for it? What if you make the right choice and your children thrive because of it?" Mrs. Chen countered. "You cannot live your life afraid of what might go wrong. Sometimes you have to take a risk." Penelope thought about those words all afternoon as she washed dishes and scrubbed floors. She thought about them as she walked home and found Margaret trying to cook dinner, because Penelope had been too exhausted the night before to prepare anything in advance. She thought about them as she held Samuel on her lap and watched Thomas play with the wooden horse Harrison had carved for him. Her children deserved better than this half-life, this constant scramble for survival. They deserved a home with enough food and warm clothes, and a mother who was not too exhausted to play with them. Harrison was offering all of that, and the only thing holding her back was fear. She made her decision that night, and the next morning after finishing at the mercantile, she walked to the boarding house early. Harrison was in the dining room eating breakfast, and when he saw her, his face lit up in a way that made her heart skip. "Penelope," he said, standing quickly. "I was not expecting to see you for another hour." "I need to talk to you," she said. "Privately, if possible." He followed her out to the back porch of the boarding house, a quiet spot where they would not be overheard. The morning was cool and crisp, the first real hint that autumn was coming. Penelope took a deep breath and forced herself to meet his eyes. "I have thought about what you said," she began. "About courting and marriage and building a life together." "And?" Harrison's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "And I think you should know some things before I give you an answer," she said. "I loved my husband, Harrison. Maybe not the great passionate love of novels, but I cared for him deeply, and I miss him every day. If you are looking for someone who can give you her whole heart immediately, I do not know if I can be that person. My heart is still healing, and I cannot promise when or if it will be ready for someone new." "I am not asking for your whole heart right away," Harrison said quietly. "I am asking for a chance to earn it over time. I understand that you loved your husband, and I respect that. I would never ask you to forget him or pretend those feelings did not exist." Penelope nodded, grateful for his understanding. "You should also know that my children come first always. I will not marry anyone who would mistreat them or resent them. They have been through enough." "I would never hurt your children," Harrison said with absolute conviction. "I already care about them, Penelope. Margaret is bright as a new penny, Thomas has the makings of a fine young man, and Samuel makes me laugh every time I see him. I am not looking to replace their father, but I would be honored to be a steadying presence in their lives." "Why me?" Penelope asked again, the question that would not quite leave her alone. "Why are you really doing this?" Harrison took a step closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. "Because when I look at you, I see someone I could build a real life with. Someone strong enough to be a true partner, not just a decoration. Someone who understands hard work and sacrifice and does not shy away from it. And yes, because you are beautiful and I enjoy your company, and when I imagine my future, I find myself imagining you in it. Is that enough reason?" Penelope felt something warm unfurl in her chest, something she had not let herself feel since Preston died. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The hope that maybe she could be happy again, that life could be more than just survival. "I will court you," she said, the words coming out stronger than she felt. "But I need you to understand that I am not promising anything beyond that. If at any point either of us decides this is not working, we need to be honest about it." Harrison's smile was brighter than the sunrise. "That is all I am asking for. A chance, Penelope. Just a chance." "Then you have it," she said, and felt like she was stepping off a cliff into unknown territory, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The courtship began in earnest that very day. Harrison walked her home from the boarding house and spent the afternoon helping her with laundry while they talked. He told her about his plans for the horse breeding business, how he wanted to focus on sturdy working horses that could handle the harsh Nevada climate. She told him about her childhood in a small farming community in Kansas, how she had met Preston at a church social when she was barely 17, and married him 3 months later because that was what young people did. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Harrison would appear at her house most afternoons and help with whatever work needed doing. Sometimes he would take the children for walks so Penelope could rest for an hour. Sometimes he would simply sit on the porch and talk with her while she mended clothes. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, never demanded declarations of feeling or made her uncomfortable. He also began providing for them in small ways that did not feel like charity, because he was so matter-of-fact about it. He would show up with a chicken he claimed he had won in a card game, or vegetables from someone's garden that were going to waste, or fabric he insisted the mercantile owner had given him at a steep discount. Penelope suspected he was simply buying things for them, but she was too grateful to question it too closely. The children adored him. Margaret followed him around asking endless questions about horses and the world beyond Superior. Thomas tried to imitate his walk and his mannerisms, looking for a male role model to pattern himself after. Even baby Samuel would reach for Harrison whenever he appeared, babbling happily in his incomprehensible baby language. Watching Harrison with her children did something to Penelope's heart that all his words and kindnesses to her had not quite managed. He was patient with their questions, gentle with their feelings, and genuinely seemed to enjoy their company rather than merely tolerating them. This was a man who would be a good father, she realized, and that mattered more than almost anything else. 6 weeks into their courtship, Harrison bought land. 50 acres in a valley about 3 miles from Superior, with a creek running through it and good grazing for horses. He took Penelope and the children to see it on a Sunday afternoon, driving them out in a borrowed wagon and pointing out where he planned to build a house, a barn, corrals for the horses. "It is beautiful," Penelope said, standing on a small rise and looking out over the valley. The late October air was cool and crisp, and the cottonwood trees along the creek had turned brilliant gold. "It will be more beautiful with a house on it and a family in that house," Harrison said, standing beside her while the children ran wild in the open space, shrieking with joy at having room to play. "I have been thinking about the design. Nothing fancy, but solid. 3 bedrooms to start, with room to add on later if needed. A good-sized kitchen because I know that is important. A porch facing west so we can watch the sunsets." Penelope heard the "we" in his words and felt her heart constrict. He was not just building a house for himself. He was building a home for them if she would have it. The question was whether she was ready to say yes. "Harrison," she said quietly, "can I ask you something, anything? Do you love me?" He turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I am falling in love with you, Penelope. I cannot say I am all the way there yet because we are still getting to know each other. But every day I spend with you, every conversation we have, every time I see you with your children, I fall a little deeper. So yes, I believe I am on my way to loving you completely, if I am not there already." "I am not there yet," she admitted, feeling like she owed him honesty. "I care about you deeply, I value you, I think about you constantly, but I do not know if what I feel is love or just gratitude and affection." "That is all right," Harrison said. "We have time to figure it out together." "Do we?" Penelope asked. "You are building a house, making plans. That requires some certainty, does it not?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, watching the children play. "I am going to build this house regardless of what you decide," he said finally. "If you say yes to marriage, it will be our home. If you say no, it will be mine and I will have to live with the knowledge that I was not good enough for you. But either way, I am putting down roots here. I told you I was done drifting, and I meant it." The simple honesty of his words made Penelope's throat tight. He was not trying to manipulate her or pressure her. He was simply stating facts and leaving the decision entirely in her hands. That kind of respect was rare and precious, and she knew it. "I want to say yes," she said quietly. "I want to believe this could work, but I am scared, Harrison. Scared of making a mistake, scared of trusting the wrong person, scared of what happens if this falls apart." "I am scared too," he admitted. "Scared I will not be good enough for you or your children. Scared I will fail at building the business and let you down. Scared you will never love me the way I am coming to love you. But being scared does not mean we should not try." Penelope turned to look at the land spread out before them, trying to imagine a house there, a life there. Trying to imagine waking up every morning in a real home with enough food and a man who cared for her. Trying to imagine her children growing up safe and provided for. "If I said yes," she began carefully, "what would that look like? The practical details, I mean." Harrison seemed to understand that she needed to approach this logically, to think through the realities rather than just the emotions. We would get married as soon as you felt ready, he said. I would finish building the house, which should take about 2 months with hired help. In the meantime, you would stop working the 3 jobs and focus on preparing for the move and taking care of the children. I have enough money saved to support us comfortably while the business gets established. Once the house is ready, we would move in and start building our life together. What about Preston's debts? Penelope asked. I still owe money to the company store and for his funeral. I will pay them, Harrison said simply. That is not fair to you. Marriage is a partnership, Penelope. Your debts become my debts and my resources become your resources. That is how it works. She shook her head, overwhelmed. You would take on a widow with 3 children and debts, give up your freedom and your savings just for the possibility that this might work. Not just for the possibility, Harrison said. For the certainty that trying is worthwhile, even if the outcome is uncertain. You and your children are worth the risk, Penelope. You are worth everything I have to offer. Something broke open in Penelope's chest, something that had been locked tight since Preston died. Not full love, not yet, but the beginning of it. The seed of something that could grow into something real and lasting if she was brave enough to let it. Ask me again, she said. Harrison's eyes widened slightly. What? Ask me to marry you again, Penelope said, her voice stronger now. And this time I will give you an answer. Harrison took both her hands in his calloused palms warm against her work-worn fingers. Penelope Tucker, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Would you let me be a husband to you and a father to your children? Would you build a life with me here in this valley and take a chance on a future together? Penelope looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope, and the beginning of love that matched what she was feeling. She thought about her children playing in the field, about a house with enough rooms for everyone, about not having to work herself to exhaustion just to survive. But more than any of that, she thought about Harrison himself, this good man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her not pity but partnership. Yes, she said, and felt the word reshape her entire future. Yes, I will marry you. Harrison's face broke into a smile of such pure joy that it made her breath catch. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. You have made me the happiest man in Nevada, he said. I hope I do not come to regret it, Penelope said, but she was smiling too. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you do not, Harrison promised. They told the children on the way back to town. Margaret squealed with delight and asked 100 questions about the new house. Thomas looked solemn but pleased, like he was trying to be the man of the family and approve his mother's choice. Samuel just babbled and clapped his hands, picking up on the general excitement without understanding the specifics. That evening after the children were in bed, Harrison and Penelope sat on her porch steps and made plans. They would marry in 3 weeks, a small ceremony at the church with just a few witnesses. Penelope would give notice at all 3 of her jobs immediately. Harrison would hire a crew to start building the house and aim to have it ready by the new year. They would live simply but comfortably while the horse breeding business got established. I want to be clear about something, Penelope said as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. I am not going to be a wife who sits at home doing nothing while you do all the work. I can help with the horses, keep the books for the business, contribute however I can. I would never ask you to be idle, Harrison said. I want a partner, Penelope, in every sense of the word. Your ideas and your work are valuable. Good, she said firmly, because I have been dependent on others my whole life. First my parents, then Preston, and I do not want that anymore. I want to be an equal part of whatever we build. Equal partners, Harrison agreed. I would not want it any other way. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Harrison said, Can I kiss you? Penelope's heart jumped. She had been wondering when he would ask if he would ask. "Yes," she said quietly. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, and brushed his lips against hers in a kiss that was gentle and questioning and achingly tender. It was so different from the kisses she had shared with Preston, which had been familiar and comfortable. This was new and a little frightening and filled with possibility. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "Was that all right?" "Yes," Penelope said, and found that she meant it. "It was very all right." He kissed her again, a little deeper this time, and she felt the last of her resistance crumble. This was real, this was happening, and she was choosing it with open eyes and a willing heart. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Penelope gave notice at the mercantile, the boarding house, and to all her laundry customers. Some were understanding, others less so, but she found she did not care. For the first time in months, she could sleep past 4 in the morning, could spend afternoons playing with her children instead of scrubbing other people's dirty clothes. Harrison paid off Preston's debts without ceremony, simply presenting her with receipts one day and refusing to discuss it further. He also bought fabric and hired a seamstress to make Penelope a new dress for the wedding, ignoring her protests that it was too extravagant. The dress was simple but beautiful, dark blue wool with pearl buttons, and when Penelope put it on for the first time, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked like a woman who had hope again, who had a future beyond mere survival. The change was startling. The wedding took place on a clear November morning with the first real frost sparkling on the ground. Penelope wore her new dress and carried a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Margaret had picked. Harrison wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous. The children stood as witnesses along with Mrs. Chen from the boarding house and the stable owner who had befriended Harrison. The ceremony was brief, the preacher's words washing over Penelope in a haze of nerves and disbelief that this was actually happening. When Harrison slipped a simple gold band on her finger and promised to love and cherish her for the rest of his life, she felt tears prick her eyes. When it was her turn to make the same promise, her voice shook but did not break. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher said. "You may kiss your bride." Harrison cupped her face in his hands and kissed her sweetly in front of God and witnesses, sealing their promises. When they broke apart, Penelope saw that his eyes were suspiciously bright, and she loved him a little more for not being ashamed to show emotion. They spent their wedding night in Harrison's room at the boarding house while Mrs. Chen watched the children. It was the first time Penelope had been intimate with anyone since Preston died, and she was nervous. But Harrison was patient and gentle, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable. When they finally came together, it felt like a true joining, not just of bodies but of lives and futures. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Harrison's arm around her, Penelope felt something settle in her chest. Peace, maybe, or the beginning of it. This was her life now, for better or worse, and she had chosen it freely. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked quietly. "I think I am learning how to be happy again," Penelope said honestly. "Ask me in a year and I will give you a better answer." "I will hold you to that," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. The house was completed just after the new year, a solid structure of wood and stone that looked like it had always been part of the landscape. It had 3 bedrooms as Harrison had promised, a large kitchen with a good stove, a sitting room with a fireplace, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. It was not fancy, but it was well built and spacious, and when Penelope walked through it for the first time as a resident rather than a visitor, she felt her throat close with emotion. This was home. Not just a house, but a home where her children could grow up safe and loved. A home she had helped plan and prepare for. a home that represented a future she had not dared to dream of just months before. Moving in was chaotic but joyful. Margaret claimed the smaller bedroom for herself, thrilled to have her own space. The boys would share the other bedroom, though Samuel still slept in a cradle in his parents' room. Penelope spent days organizing and arranging, making the house feel lived in and loved. Harrison started his horse breeding business in earnest, buying quality mares and a good stallion to build his foundation stock. He worked from dawn to dusk, but unlike Penelope's desperate scramble to survive, this was work with a purpose and a future. She helped where she could, keeping meticulous records of bloodlines and expenses, learning to handle the gentler horses, cooking meals for the hired hands when Harrison needed extra help. They fell into a rhythm, a partnership that felt natural and right. Harrison would come in from the barn for supper, dirty and tired but smiling. They would eat together as a family, the children chattering about their days. After the children were in bed, they would sit together on the porch or by the fireplace, talking about the day's work and making plans for the future. And slowly, gradually, Penelope felt herself falling in love with her husband. Not the quick, passionate love of youth, but something deeper and more enduring. Love built on respect and partnership, on shared work and shared dreams, on the 100 small kindnesses that made up a life together. She loved the way he was endlessly patient with the children, teaching Thomas to ride and reading stories to Margaret and bouncing Samuel on his knee. She loved the way he would kiss her forehead when he came in from working, like he could not quite believe she was real. She loved the way he listened when she talked, truly listened, and valued her opinions. She loved the way he made her feel safe, not because she was weak, but because she knew he would stand beside her against whatever came. By spring, the horse business was turning a profit. Not a fortune, but enough to live comfortably with money left over to save and reinvest. Harrison's reputation for quality stock was spreading, and miners and ranchers alike sought him out. Penelope's careful bookkeeping ensured they never overextended themselves, and together they made a formidable team. One evening in early April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Penelope took Harrison's hand and said, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it?" "I am pregnant," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Harrison's eyes went wide, and then a smile spread across his face that was brighter than the sunset. "Truly, truly," she confirmed. "The baby should come in late October if my calculations are correct." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "Not just a stepfather, but a real father." "You are already a real father to Margaret and Thomas and Samuel," Penelope said firmly. "But yes, this will be your biological child as well." "Our child," Harrison corrected. "Yours and mine together. God, Penelope, you have made me so happy." "I am happy too," she said, and realized it was completely true. She was happy, genuinely happy, in a way she had not been since before Preston died. Maybe in a way she had never quite been before, because this happiness was built on a foundation of true partnership, rather than simply accepting the life handed to her. They told the children at supper the next day. Margaret was excited about having a baby to help care for. Thomas seemed less certain but willing to accept it. Samuel, now almost 2 years old, did not really understand but clapped his hands because everyone else seemed happy. The pregnancy was easier than her previous ones had been, perhaps because she was not working herself to exhaustion or worrying constantly about money. Harrison was attentive but not smothering, making sure she rested when needed but not treating her like she was fragile. The summer passed peacefully. the business continuing to grow, the children thriving in their new life. In late October, on a cool autumn evening very much like the one when Harrison had first proposed, Penelope went into labor. Harrison rode for the midwife while Mrs. Chen came to stay with the children. The labor was long but not overly difficult, and just before dawn Penelope delivered a healthy baby boy with a shock of dark hair and strong lungs. "What should we name him?" Harrison asked, holding his son with a look of wonder on his face. "I thought maybe Henry," Penelope said. "Henry Thorne, if that suits you." "Henry," Harrison repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Welcome to the world, Henry Thorne." He leaned down to kiss Penelope, gentle and reverent. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for this, for everything. For taking a chance on me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family. I know I say it often, but I love you, Penelope. More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Penelope said, and the words came easily now, no longer frightening or uncertain. "I love you, Harrison Thorne, and I am grateful every day that you saw something worth saving in a desperate widow working 3 jobs." "I saw someone worth loving," Harrison corrected, "and I was right." The years that followed were not without challenges. The horse business had lean times as well as prosperous ones. The children faced the normal childhood illnesses and injuries that sent parents' hearts racing. There were droughts and harsh winters, and the thousand small difficulties that came with building a life in the Wild West. But through it all, Penelope and Harrison faced everything together. When times were hard, they tightened their belts and worked harder. When times were good, they saved and prepared for the next difficulty. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and honest dealing. Margaret grew into a bright young woman who eventually married a school teacher and moved to Carson City. Thomas took to the horse business like he was born to it, and became Harrison's partner when he came of age. Samuel proved to have a gift for numbers, and handled all the financial aspects of the expanding business. Henry, their first child together, became a veterinarian and brought modern animal medicine to the operation. More children followed over the years, 2 more boys and a girl, each one welcomed and loved. The house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the business grew from a small breeding operation to one of the most respected horse ranches in Nevada. On a warm summer evening in 1902, 20 years after that first gunshot had shattered Penelope's world, she sat on the porch with Harrison and watched the sun set over their valley. Their children and grandchildren were scattered across the property, the sound of their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The house was full of life and love, the barns were full of quality horses, and the future looked bright. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Penelope asked, leaning her head on Harrison's shoulder. They were both in their 50s now, with gray threading through their hair and lines on their faces, but to her he was still the handsome cowboy who had offered her hope when she had none. "Sometimes," Harrison admitted. "If I had ridden into a different town, if you had refused my help, if you had said no when I proposed, so many moments where things could have gone another way." "I am glad they did not," Penelope said firmly. "I am glad you rode into Superior when you did. I am glad you were stubborn enough to keep helping even when I tried to refuse. I am glad you asked me to marry you and gave me a reason to say yes. You only need one job now," Harrison said with a smile, echoing words he had said so long ago. "Be my wife." "That is still all I want from you, Penelope. Just be my wife and my partner and the love of my life." "I am all those things," Penelope said, lifting her face to kiss him. "And I always will be." As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Penelope thought about the journey that had brought her here. From desperate widow to beloved wife, from 3 grinding jobs to 1 true partnership, from mere survival to genuine thriving. Harrison had not saved her exactly. She had saved herself through grit and determination and refusal to give up. But he had offered her his hand when she needed it most, and together they had built something beautiful. The house was warm with lamplight behind them, full of family and love, and the echoes of 20 years of laughter and tears and ordinary joys. This was what happiness looked like, Penelope thought. Not the absence of hardship, but the presence of love strong enough to weather any storm. She had worked 3 jobs to survive, and the cowboy had said she only needed one: be my wife. She had taken that risk, made that leap of faith, and it had led her here to this perfect moment of contentment. Their story became something of a legend in Superior and the surrounding areas. People spoke of the widow who had worked herself to the bone to feed her children and the cowboy who had loved her enough to offer her a different path. Young couples starting out would sometimes come to Harrison and Penelope for advice, and they would always say the same thing. Marriage is work, they would say, but it is the best work there is when you find the right partner. Build on respect and honesty, face challenges together, and never stop choosing each other every single day. As the years turned into decades, the Thorne Ranch became a fixture of the Nevada landscape. The original 50 acres expanded to over 500, with some of the finest horses in the West bearing the Thorne brand. The house was expanded again and again as children and grandchildren came to visit or returned home. Penelope and Harrison grew old together with the grace that comes from a life well lived. They sat on that porch every evening, weather permitted, holding hands and watching the sun set over the valley they had built together. Their love, which had started as a leap of faith and a desperate hope, had grown into something solid and enduring that would outlast both of them. When Penelope was 73 years old, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren, she told the story one last time of how she had met Harrison. The youngest ones listened with wide eyes as she described the desperate days after Preston's death, working 3 jobs and barely surviving. She told them about the cowboy who had appeared with his gentle horses and his quiet kindness, who had seen value in a widow with 3 children and more debts than assets. "He told me I only needed 1 job," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "Be my wife," he said. And I was so scared to say yes. Scared of trusting again, scared of making a mistake, scared of everything. But I said yes anyway, and it was the best decision I ever made. "Did you love him right away, Grandma?" one of the great-grandchildren asked. Penelope smiled and looked at Harrison, who sat beside her with his hand in hers as it had been for over 40 years. "No, sweetheart, I did not love him right away, but I learned to love him, and that love grew deeper every year we spent together. Love is not always a lightning strike. Sometimes it is a seed planted with hope and tended with care until it grows into something strong enough to weather any storm." Harrison squeezed her hand and said, "I fell in love with her strength before I fell in love with her. I watched her work 3 jobs and raise 3 children alone and never complain, never give up. That is when I knew she was the woman I wanted to build a life with." They lived several more good years together before death came for them, as it comes for everyone. Harrison went first, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, and Penelope followed less than a year later, her heart unable to bear the separation. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their valley, and their children made sure the headstone bore the words that had started it all. She worked 3 jobs to survive. He said she only needed one: "Be my wife," and she said yes. The ranch continued for generations after they were gone, run by their descendants who had learned from their example what it meant to build something lasting through hard work and true partnership. The original house, though expanded and modernized, still stood at the heart of it all, a testament to the widow and the cowboy who had taken a chance on each other and built a love story for the ages. And on quiet evenings when the sun set over the Nevada mountains in shades of orange and pink, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of their voices on the porch, talking about the day's work and making plans for tomorrow, together as they had always been, as they would always be in memory and in the legacy of love they left behind.